Hey everybody, this is John Bell with the Harbinger Report, and I've got a guest for you today named Shawn Starry, and we're here to discuss giants. So yeah, sorry about that long intro. I had a buddy of mine made that for me, and I sent it to a buddy of mine in Hollywood because I worked in Hollywood. And my Hollywood buddy's like, "Why didn't you get me to make it?" And I was like, "Cause he charged me like 200. You would charge like 2,000. That's why." And yeah, it's crazy the amount of pay they get for like little stuff like that. But still, the guy did a great job. Of course, all my Hollywood friends say it's too long. It's too long. No one wants to wait that long. But I love it, and the guy did such a great job with it. But anyway, it's been a while since I've done a show. There was a lot of drama for a while. I wanted to let that die down. Plus, we had the holidays. But all the fans are fantastic and great and very loving and supportive. So I'm all for that. I've got some big shows coming up, some big guests I'm trying to line up if possible. One of them is I had a special guest coming on that I was really excited about, a Protestant who was doing a show on the Antichrist and his own research that led him to the identity of the Antichrist. And Rob, okay, now I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. Rob Skiba, and he died shortly before coming on my show. And I still had the text message where he's like, "Look, I'm going to this conference, and then we'll arrange a time. I'll come on." And I'm like, "Great!" I was so excited to get him on. Well, he passed away, but I've reached out to his son, who is now kind of carrying on his dad's legacy, Jeremiah, and he said that he might be interested in coming on to talk about his dad's work and his legacy. So very excited about that. Cross your fingers, pray for his safety and health. But today we've got a show with Shawn Starry, and we're going to be talking about his background and giants. And I originally approached Shawn because for those of you who don't know, I just started a new channel called Brave and Bushcraft. And in Brave and Bushcraft, it's going to be doing bushcraft, survivalism, gear review, prepping kind of topics, and hopefully less drama than cryptid, paranormal genre, which just seems to, I don't know what it is, stoking the flames of so much hate amongst people when we should all, be supporting each other. But anyway, Shawn wrote some books on survivalism and home defense. In fact, I bought two of his books. The first one on survivalism, second on the home defense. So I tried to dig those up before the show, but my entire house is a library. I couldn't find them. I gotta dig more and try to get them. But so I apologize for that. But anyway, so I approached him for coming on that show. But then after talking to him, he told me about some of the stories he's had in his background, and I was like, "Holy cow! I want to get you on the Harbinger Report to talk about some of your encounters." Because he had a real life encounter face to face just about with a giant. And I told him there's not too many people I've met that have done that and lived to tell a tale. So I was like, "Will you please come on this show and we can get on here and get into it and discuss it." And we'll, if he's willing, still do another show sometime on the Survival Bushcraft show as well. I'd like to kick it off with Shawn and his background for that, just establishing a need for why that's important in our age and time. But anyway, without me rambling on for too much longer, too late, Mr. Shawn, why don't you explain just a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into different topics.
Okay. I served 4 years in the Marine Corps as a counterintelligence officer, special operator. After that, I worked for several different military contracting jobs, where I should say companies, but I was a military contractor, and we worked in a lot of clandestine operations. We worked in government locations, and one of the government locations that I worked at for 2 years, working as a armed security officer for a government underground bunker that they had, well, let me put it this way. Those bunkers are situated for approximately, starting off with 1,500 people or so. The bunker is basically about the size of the city of Chicago. So there's 20 levels, and on the 21st level is where their bioscience labs are. That's where anything that has to do with biology or chemical or nuclear. So a lot of your like mad scientist labs, so that's kind of what we used to call them, a mad scientist lab. So on the fourth day while we were there, the head of security was giving my partner and I a guided tour through the whole location. And we came to the fourth level. And on the fourth level, they have a mag-lab, I can't pronounce it, a magnetic rail system where trains, they have a huge oversized train. It's really big. You can set two M1A2 Abrahams inside, side by side, and you still got about maybe 4 or 5 feet on each side. And the height of that train is approximately, I want to say, 20 to 22 feet tall. But they travel at such a phenomenal speeds. I have a map here. This is the exact map of the entire rail system that goes underground. So I'm going to show that to you real quick. And that's what that looks like right there. And what most people don't realize is that all of these cities, the underground cities, are actually located just below where all of the big malls in America, every single big mall in America, it has a tunnel system that connects to the underground cities. So there's a direct connection between the big malls and the underground cities anyway. So my story with the Nephilim giant is this. So while we were given a guided tour, we went down to the fourth level. We drive Humvees down to those areas because it's pretty big. So not even a golf cart can get you from one end to the other end in time. So we use golf carts within that level, certain areas, but they're sectioned off. So it kind of helps kind of keep things in order. And anyway, we stopped at the what they call the blast doors before you go right into where the mag-lab trains are. And the head of security was telling us, he says, well, when we walk in there, he said, I don't want you to yell, scream, sneeze, breathe hard. Just don't say anything. Just just take a few steps in there, just look around, and then just come back out. So you guys get an idea of what you're guarding. So we walked in there, and I looked to my right. My partner was on my left side, so I was looking to my right. I could see two M1A2 Abraham tanks that were kind of stacked from side to side, and I was panning around. I noticed that my partner was kind of frozen up, so I looked to the left. And that's when I realized, or to say to the right, that's when I realized that there was something in this big giant plexiglass box. The plexiglass, I want to say, is approximately like 6 inches thick or so. It's got a bunch of holes in it. It's about 8 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and about 10 feet long. It's kind of a weird looking great, I guess. But what was inside of it, that's what really kind of freaked us out, because I noticed that there was this giant humanoid sitting there. So based on five senses, the first thing I noticed was a rancid smell. It smells like rotting flesh, a dead skunk, and rotten eggs. My partner, however, kind of gasped when he saw this thing moving. And all of a sudden, this thing starts roaring as loud as it could, and it was shaking the box, trying to get out of it, but he wasn't able to get out of that containment. And so we had to back out as quickly as you can. What I can tell you is this is what I've learned while I was there. There are different classifications for Nephilim giants. You're going to get the ones that are more domesticated. Those are the ones that you're going to see that looks more like, they look more like Pinocchio. That's the best way to describe it, just the skin texture of it. That one I haven't seen, but this one, this is like the classification of a wild animal, okay? So imagine, if you will, like a wolf. If you get this wolf out of the wild, and the best way to say he's got rabies, and of course, the hair is falling off. There's some hair, but he's more in a rabid state. This is the best way to describe this thing. It's sort of a grayish, brownish color, long bony fingers. This thing is massive, and you can tell that he doesn't have any regular clothing on at all. It just, I can't describe what he was wearing. Maybe something out of a fur, maybe, I'm not sure. But we backed out, and of course the head of security, stopped us, and he said, "Yeah," he says, "that's a Nephilim giant." He said, "Don't get freaked out about it." He said, "They're all over the place in this world." The U.S. government has had a vested interest in these things going back all the way as early as 1920s, and they've been trying to send teams out to capture these things and bring them down for safekeeping, so to speak. And then when we got down to the 21st level, and that's pretty much, we have an all-access pass, and give you an idea what an all-access pass sort of looks like. Hold on 1 second here, see if I can find it. But this all-access pass allows us to be able to enter any level at any given time, especially if there's any kind of an emergency. And even an idea, but that's what it looks like. It's my all-access pass right there. Okay. This allows me to be able to get to any one of these levels. Now, the 21st level, we were going through, and we were talking to some of the scientists down there, and they were talking about how they're doing a lot of experimentation with Nephilim DNA. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I didn't really ask any questions. They just kind of let them do the talking, and we do the listening. There wasn't really any pertinent information that really clicked with me at the time. But what was interesting is that the fact that he said that they've been using Nephilim DNA to on kind of a mixture of Nephilim DNA, animals, and human beings. They said something like the Nephilim DNA is a binding agent in the DNA. So it binds certain types from one type to the next, which is, I still to this day, I don't quite understand that exactly. But they showed us the classifications of pictures of what the different Nephilim giants look like.
Oh, wow.
So we have an idea, okay, this is what they look like. There's like technical term names for each one. But what's interesting for me is that the one that's the most wild Nephilim giant is actually a Sasquatch. And they came right out and said, look, it's a Bigfoot.
That's a theory I've had forever, because they're giants and they're cannibals. Mm-hmm. And that fits the basic description. And they go way back to ancient times. So that fits the perfect description. So I figured either they were some sort of Nephilim or chimera off the Nephilim of some sort. Had to be. That was my own personal theory as to what Bigfoot are. So it's interesting they told you that.
Yeah, I my my family lineage goes all the way back to the Blackfoot Indians up in the southern Wisconsin area, and I had gone up there for a powwow when I was like 5 years old. And then, of course, I came back again when I was like 30 years old. I don't look Indian at all, really, but maybe for just a nose and a few slight features. But they did recognize me right off the bat. They knew who I was, which was really incredible. And while we were there, it's a place called Mounds, Wisconsin. And so I had a lot of questions about those mounds. And I said, well, what's those mounds for? I mean, what's the significance behind it? And our chief said, well, that's where the Nephilim giants are buried. And I said, well, what do you mean? Didn't they just, take the time to dig a hole? And, they said no, because when there was a big battle between the Indians and the Nephilim, because the Nephilim went crazy, started eating people because the Indians couldn't produce enough food fast enough to keep up with their appetite. So they started fighting back. And one of the big things was they had to bring it down. They knew they couldn't kill them. They had to do just enough to bring it down. And they start covering it with the earth. And once it starts covering with the earth, it saps the strength right off and it puts it into a dormant sleep. So
wow.
That's the reason why they're not allowed to disturb the mountains whatsoever. They don't allow scientists to dig it up. But they did, however, a couple of years ago, allow them to come out with a LiDAR camera and actually shoot this camera through the mountains to try to get a picture of what that Nephilim giant looks like. And what was interesting to me was that they showed a picture of it up at the community center of that LiDAR camera, and it shows the Nephilim giant being completely intact. And we're talking like the skin, the hair, everything. It's almost like it never decayed at all, but it's just kind of rusting. So hold on 1 second. I got a cat that's meowing. I got to get her out of this room.
Yeah, well, that fits with a lot of the stories I've heard about Nephilim, where they claim about Indian mounds. They're not actually Indians. Didn't bury their dead in mounds. By the way, I'm part Indian too. I'm part Cherokee, and on both sides of my family. And we had members that married into our family on both sides to escape the kind of horror conditions of the reservations. But if you didn't go to reservation, you didn't get a number, so you can't prove it government wise. So right. Yeah, I'm an eighth at bare minimum, but probably more than that because I'm an eighth just on one side. Cherokee. My grandmother was a Womack, which Womack is only Cherokee name.
Okay.
And she was full blooded. So, but yeah, I'm more Scottish than anything, so I don't look Indian at all. Yeah. It's just a smaller part of my heritage, but it's one I respect and value a lot. Yeah, that's interesting. So Indians did not bury their dead in mounds, as we're told growing up as kids. They bury giants in mounds, and that's what these large mounds are that we're finding across the U.S. that they call Indian mounds. They're giant burial grounds.
Right. And of course, if some of these people here today are watching this, and if you know much about the Indian traditions, is that the Indians don't actually bury their dead. What they do is they build a big pike. It's kind of like 4 pikes and a table on top. And what they do is they wrap up their dead and they lay them up there. They take all of their most prized possessions with them, and they just leave them there. And there is a 1-year ritual. For 1 year, they go through a mourning process. For the whole year, they never leave that area where the person had died or deceased. They actually put up their teepees. They camp there right next to it to have a sacred protection of the dead. So it allows the dead to be able to the spirit to be able to go to the heavens But it takes a whole year. There's a ritual that goes on every day, every night for one whole year. So that's that's the one big key giveaway is that these mounds were not part of the sacred burial grounds. The archaeologists that do find Indian remains, that's the answer to that really is simple. Is they never buried them. It's just that the Pikes system that they've had them on after that 1 year when the Indians leave, that Pike system starts to wither and fall apart, and by then all that's left is just the bones, and that kind of just settles to the ground, and then of course over time, the soil ends up kind of building up around it, and then kind of buries it naturally. So that's why you'll never see an Indian tribe that actually digs up the ground and buries their dead. Not like the traditional modern day American where we have graves, grave sites all over where they bury people down into the ground. And the Indians always believed that once you do that, you trap the spirit of the person within the body. So that's the reason why they put them up on this kind of a big pyre or whatever you want to call it. And some other traditions, they put them on the pyre and then they just light it on fire. And so that way the soul can be released to the heavens quicker. That's just another way of doing it. But that's what they taught me kind of growing up when I was real little. But yeah, the mounds, anytime you go to anywhere you start seeing mounds anywhere, that's where all the Nephilisms are kind of held in a prison-like system. They're kind of in a dormant state for the most part. Some of the other ones that you'll see along the way that they were killed, you'll see skeletal remains of those Nephilisms. Those are kind of like the offsprings of generations, several generations of Nephilism. They don't have, what the best way to describe it, they don't have the supernatural power as the original Nephilisms did. They're kind of a hybrid mix, and then pretty after a while they start to see. And what I mean by that is the original Nephilisms were anywhere from 20 feet or taller. Okay, anything under 20 feet, say 7, 8, 9, 10 feet, 12 feet. These are all hybrids. These are all kind of, they're I should way. They're kind of like blended with another human species. Over time, it's just
chimeras. Because what most people don't know, even people who are scholars in this subject, is most understand that if you study the books of Enoch, that explains that you had the 200 watcher angels that kind of fell from heaven, if you will, left their former estate, broke their oaths, and landed on Mount Hermon in modern day Turkey near Jerusalem and in Israel. And then they were jealous of mankind being able to have wives and a procreation and sex and all these kind of things. And they took human wives and they found a way, unnatural way, but through their superior intellects, they were able to find a way to create children. And these children became known, the Bible says, as the Nephilim. Yep. And the Nephilim ended up becoming cannibalistic giants. However, there's a distinction between the first Nephilim and kind of the generations that came after, as Shawn's referring to. And even the Bible talks about some of the first generations. Some of them are like 300-400 feet tall. I mean, they were like insanely tall. In fact, I got a book right here by first century historian Josephus Flavius, who was recognized by Catholics and Protestants historians and theologians. And he gave an account that in the first century in Jerusalem, I use this example a lot, I love it. You know how we have museums that will put like T-Rexes back together so you can see these large skeletons? Well, they did the same thing in the first century in the city of Jerusalem. On horizontally on the ground, they put a skeleton together of a human being that was 100 feet long, on display for the whole public to see. 100 foot long, all right, 100 feet. So, and there are accounts of these things being 300 and 400 feet tall. Now, this Rob Skiba would say these would have been known as the original, would have been known, the first crop, if you will, the first generations were known as the Titans.
Yeah.
And that's where we get, he says later, we had the war, the clash of the Titans. That's where all of them started a war against each other and mostly wiped themselves out. And then God finished them off with Noah's flood. And oh, by the way, I have a tablet from Nineveh it's a creation written in cuneiform of Sanskrit of the clay tablets they found in the library of Nineveh. And this particular one gives an account. This one, the inscriptions on here in cuneiform, given in Sanskrit cuneiform, they're like dashes with accents on one side of the dash. But anyway, this particular one gives an account of Noah's flood, which makes it particularly interesting, and was a civilian source that gave an account of Noah and the flood, which is insane if you think about the ramifications of that, But yeah, he said the first generations were different. They had maybe these supernatural abilities were really big, really strong. And then over time, you had lesser generations. There was a lessening. And another part that scholars don't always focus on is, so the fallen angels created the giants, which would be known as demigods in Greek mythology, right?
Right.
But the giants, with the help of the fallen angels, they created another race. And that other race became known as the Chimera. And the chimera was the mixing of human, animal, plant, bird, fish DNA. I remember I prayed. It said that the giants sinned against the grass, against the birds of the sky, the animals of the ground. They sinned against everything. I prayed for 2 weeks one time, and I was like, Lord, what does this mean? What does this mean? At the end of those 2 weeks, one word popped in my head: DNA. And I realized at that moment, they were genetically manipulating the DNA and mixing all these things together. And see, here's something, since I'm on the crazy topic, I'll bring up because it's super important. Here's something people don't understand. The jabs that's going on today, that's not new. This has come full circle from the past until now. The same thing happened in the ancient time with the human race that was being dominated by fallen angels and Nephilim giants and that kind of thing. They started a DNA program to give you a DNA altering substance that would change your DNA, gene therapy. And of course, I'm only saying this for entertainment purposes only, for the gatekeepers, if you will. So, but they started a DNA gene therapy program, was actually what it was, and it started to make changes in the human race to where all of a sudden people are having babies, and these babies are having black eyes, antlers, hooves, weird stuff. And I have no doubt we're going to start seeing that again right now with the stuff that you see going on right now. This is not new. This is not new.
Well, let me share something with you. So the CIA, which is known as the clandestine services, a clandestine agency. So they have access to everything that's out there, going back thousands of years. They know pretty much how everything works, right? They know about all these mutations and genes and things like this. So in America, we're the only country where it is required by our federal government to they have to inform us about something that's potentially catastrophic, or inform us of something that's more underlying but eventually becomes catastrophic. And that's called informed consent. So the way they do informed consent is going back to the late 1940s, early 1950s, when the CIA was actually kind of new in its infancy agency at the time, but they were working with Hollywood. And what they would do is they would give Hollywood a script based on actual events or actual people or actual situations. And then Hollywood would go and produce it. They would funded. CIA would help fund that as well. They would put these movies out there. And so I don't know if you've ever seen that Netflix movie about this little boy who was born in a ward at the time. There was a bunch of rash of children being born with a mix of animal and human
Sweet
DNA.
tooth. Sweet
And
tooth.
then there's this big black guy who would go on to protect this little boy who had deer antlers,
Sweet tooth.
sweet tooth, right? So that is actually an informed consent. They've given us informed consent on, hey, we're kind of doing this in more of a satire way. Like, you have to give an example. So in comedy, the rule of comedy is they'll tell you the truth about something, but they'll kind of put a twist to it to make it funny. And so when you make something funny, it sort of disarms people. And so they just kind of laugh and accept whatever it is that they're hearing. But that's actually another form of informed consent. And so this is what the government's been doing for so long, is they put these movies out. And the reason why they're putting it out is because it's informed consent. They're letting us know, if you go buy the ticket and watch the movie at a movie theater, throughout the whole movie, you are giving the U.S. government informed consent, allowing them to be able to do these things. And you accept it for what it is. They're trying to normalize it psychologically. So when it does happen, people aren't going to be so freaked out about it. They'll be like, oh, this is kind of cute, right? Until the thing goes rabid. And then, and then, of course, they're going to start attacking the normal people. So it's all about the perversion of laws, the natural laws. There's so much perversion going on. But they have such a way to manipulate the public into thinking this is normal. It is not normal. And I give you a kind of this is how I know about it. It's when I worked in the underground dumps, we see a lot of these things happen. And we hear a lot about what they call the informed consent. How, they've got some other, could be, like I've been saying for years, listen, we have a zombie virus out there. Okay. And a lot of people, I've lost a lot of friends. I've lost a lot of family.
When you say that, you mean like real zombie virus, not like zombie like.
No, a real zombie virus. And that's why the CDC ended up printing an actual pamphlet. You can go to CDC.com.
It was on their page. It's on their website.
Yeah.
I read it.
And you go there and they put it in cartoon form like a comic book. That is their informed consent. This is how they kind of turn off that seriousness button in your brain.
Right.
Look at it and laugh like, oh, okay, whatever. It's just a freaking comic book.
Yeah.
That's how they've got us thinking. But anytime an agency like that puts something like that out, that is their informed consent. So what they're actually telling you is we have this stuff. Okay. So every CDC agency has the most lethal viruses in the world in safekeeping for the potentiality of try to safeguard it and keep it. But they also do is they look at if there's any gene mutations of that virus, so they can have something to compare to. But as far as like the vaccines for it, I will tell you that all vaccines have live viruses in them. They're traditionally in the past when they came out with the polio virus, they were supposed to have dead cells of that polio virus in the vials. And when they realized it wasn't working, they had to go back and put a live virus. But what they did was they changed the parts per billion as far as how much of that virus they can be able to give someone. So they had to do kind of a calculated measure. And they used to use the people in the insane asylums back in the early 1920s just for that purpose. But the thing is that the people in the insane asylums back in the 1920s were not insane people. They were just people who didn't conform to the new society that the elitists were trying to build, right? So they conducted a lot of inhumane experiments on these people. That hasn't changed. That's still going on to this day. I know of other locations, other bunkers where government bunkers that they're doing this kind of stuff. Now, my time working in the underground bunker, having seen what I've seen and heard what I've heard, the biggest takeaway for me was I couldn't wait until my NDA expired. Um, but the thing
And
is,
for the audience, tell them what an NDA is.
so it's called a non-disclosure agreement. Anytime you take, if you're a military contractor, even if you're a soldier, you go into the military, you have to sign what they call the NDA clause. The NDA clause says that anytime you discuss anything that's top secret or ongoing, potentially could be top secret, or anything that you see or hear, you cannot disclose it to the public. Okay. You can't even tell your family members. I couldn't even tell my wife. 99.9% of the stuff that I've seen, and that's for good reasons too, because I don't want to freak her out. But um, you know, it wasn't until my NDA is finally expired. This allows me to be able to come out and say I know bits and pieces of this. I've seen this, or I've heard this from the actual scientists, or what they're trying to do, or how things work, and just kind of get a general consensus of how things work. It's before security reasons, because anytime that we have to deal with something, we got to know what we're up against. So there's standard operating procedures, SOP,
SOP.
dealing with anything that's within the confines of that particular area. So if there was a virus outbreak, they have sniffers, detectors. And if that virus gets loose, like you see in the movie, I've seen the movie once with my wife years ago, but I was kind of like, I kind of wanted,
Outbreak.
huh?
Outbreak. Who was in it? What was it about?
Mila Djokovic, I think's her name. She
Yeah,
was
that's Resident Evil.
Resident Evil. Okay, so you see that scene where they have that vial and it breaks against the table and it comes out, and you sort of see like this little haze come off of it. There's a sniffer that's located. That's actually it doesn't stick out. It's more like a pinhole, but it sniffs anything, any kind of a virus, and it detects it automatically. If it's a contagion, it'll actually start
It goes
shutting
into
everything
lockdown.
down, locking up the
Yep.
doors, and everyone has to self isolate as much as they can. Take it, get back to your room or whatever. Just
And then
kind
they
of,
have the purging option.
yeah. And what they try to do is purge that virus out. Hope that nobody's been affected by it. But and then of course they've got a special team that goes down there, and they're all wearing mirror masks. They're wearing yeah, yeah. The they're called like level 3 suits. Basically, got an oxygen tank built into them. They're like NBC suits pretty much. And when they go in there, they're armed to the teeth, and they've got these little snippers, the handheld snippers, and they could detect the parts per billion, every step of the way. They've got cameras that are, while they're checking it, they're calling it out. That gets recorded and that gets sent back to the to this our what we call it our security headquarters, which is within that place. And it's not just us. There's teams of other people in there. You got scientists. You've got the engineers. You've got the fire chief there as well. You've got the NBC team there. So there's a whole catechism of different people, but everybody's sitting at the panel. Everybody's watching the monitors. Everybody sees on their screen. It pertains to their job, and so they talk back and forth and say, okay, you may say, hey, okay, stop, retreat. That means they can't go beyond that point. And if that's the case, then they have to do a burnout. So they have to close all the doors and burn everything out.
That's the purge. Burnout.
Yeah. So these Raccoon City in that movie is the best example of a modern day government bunker. I can't explain it. It's insane
Did
that
you ever
they
see Andromeda Strain back in the day?
what's that?
Andromeda Strain, the old movie.
Andromeda strain. Yeah, they've
They
got
did a great
everything.
job.
They've got everything down there. I mean, it's you have to be very careful. Of course, if we have a life insurance policy of $2 million. So if anything happens to us, my wife gets the money, but she doesn't get told how I died, and she doesn't get my body. My body is gone somewhere else or processed a different way. But and of course, they give her what they call the fictitious death certificate, saying something like he died in a car crash or died of a heart attack or whatever, something more natural. So this way, when the family starts asking, they'll give you an urn, but your ashes are not in it,
Right.
and so your family can have a proper funeral, so to speak.
Right.
But the 2 years that I was there anyway, as far as the Nephilim go, I know they're real. I know they exist. I've seen them firsthand. Well, one anyway. But we've actually seen on the wall, I kid you not, it's kind of like a map. It actually shows you the different Nephilisms. They're all classified as, going from pretty much from the age of them, wild to domesticated, what their abilities are, what their weaknesses are. And I will tell you that if you ever encounter a Nephilim in the woods, it's going to be more like Bigfoot. They're a little more docile. They don't really like being around people. But if they get threatened, I can tell you this much: you're not going to outrun them.
There's no way. I've heard people in trucks that couldn't outrun them.
No, yeah, you're right. They're very fast, very
They're
agile.
extremely, for their size, they're extremely fast.
Yeah.
Like in military, like your larger humans tend to, the bigger they are, the slower they tend to be. But with these creatures, no, and other types of cryptids, in fact, with some dog men, it's been described like this: you have one run in front of you, and it looks like this. That's all you see. Your mind registers that something just ran across your path, but it was so fast you can't pick up frame by frame of what it was. All you see is a thing like that go in front of you at top speed. And there's been cameras of this where I've had cameras where people film something running and you see like a shadow go across. You stop it frame by frame and it's a dog man. I mean, full out dog man on two legs with hands, like digits, fingers, and shoulders, like a linebacker, standing upright. But that's what you see in the frame by frame, but it's so fast. Same with these Bigfoot. I've had people tell me, one person told me they were driving in a truck and this thing was outside their door and keeping pace with them.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I will say this. One thing I do know about the Bigfoots or the Nephilim giants, they have an innate ability to detect cameras. So they've adapted to our technology, but they can actually see a camera from 100 yards away. Just like a cat has a cat can see a light on a different spectrum, and they can see when a camera is on. And so that's one of the things is that they evolved over time to hide themselves in plain sight or just not to be around humans. But if you're way out in the thick of the woods, you're miles from any near civilization, then you're in their territory. You are in their territory. And if they feel threatened by you, yes, they will come and they will eat you. However, I do have a story that I want to share with you. My first-hand encounter with an SF operator who was actually out in Mount Rushmore, and this was about 4 days after this encounter. That's when I met him down in the underground bunker, and that's the Nephilim that they were actually transporting. Okay, so I kind of made this connection here. The way he said it was this. So the FBI Joint Task Force, along with the Army SF operators, were sent to Mount Rushmore because the National Park rangers were reporting to the headquarters of the FBI that just in I think it was the last month or 2 months, over 2,000 people went missing. They have done everything they can to try to keep people on the main trails and keep them from wandering off, and they were mystified because they got all these people missing. They have to. There's a certain protocol they have to go through. They're not allowed to let regular police department. They know this, to go and do a search with, a bloodhound, for example, where they have volunteers come out and searching, for this person that's lost in the woods or whatever. They're not allowed to do that because of the fact that it's under the federal government's control. They have to call in to the FBI, and the FBI then calls into the military, and they do a joint task force together to go out and look for these individuals, especially this large number of people missing. So they had a pretty good estimation exactly where this thing was. So the FBI comes in first, and then about 10 minutes after, then you have your SF operators, Army Rangers come in, and once the Rangers got on the ground, they were about 100 yards up this little wooden cabin just sits on top of this hill. And so they went up in that direction because that's where the tracks were leading. As soon as they got into the door, they see one FBI agent on the floor up against the wall underneath the table, holding on to his knees, crying and pissing all over himself. And as soon as he got close enough, trying to get close enough to him, the FBI agent looks and sees the SF operators, and he goes like this, stop, and then he points towards the kitchen, which is right around the corner. And so they kind of formed up 5-man team. They come around, and what do they see? They see the Nephilim, or the Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it, hunched over, basically eating what's left of this FBI operator. And so they got his attention, and as soon as it kind of pivot, turned around, they started shooting. They went through every single bag they had. They dumped so many bullets on this thing. They were able just enough to bring it down, but not to kill it, which is pretty amazing. They were able to get it restraint, and then there's a black op team that comes in that actually does containment. They were able to pull it out, put it into that containment box, which is the one that I described, and they would fly it over to their maglev, which is on the other side of the mountain. There's actually a underground bunker with kind of an open blast door, or whatever you want to call it. But he said as soon as they got in there, there was 3 other ones. It was kind of side by side. They didn't look all the same, but relatively, you could tell that they were all, cryptoids or Nephilim giants, right? So when I was talking to him at that time, I said, yeah, we kind of got informal introduced to this Nephilim. But we saw the box. I gave him a description of what it was. And he said, that's the one that we caught. That's the one that was that killed over 2,000 people at the Mount Rushmore.
That's a staggering amount.
Yeah.
I'm writing it down. So now when you said that the SF team, the operators, when they were able to bring it down, but they weren't able to kill it, kind of thing. Were you told anything on what type of arms they were using?
So I know they were using your traditional NATO rounds, 223s. Mm-hmm. They were copper tip rounds. I know some of them, they said they had incendiary rounds, a couple of incendiary rounds in it or whatever. They were able just to kind of make a little poke in it. But they said a lot of the rounds were just hitting him and just kind of crumpling up.
Normally when they go into situations like that, they'll switch from the 223s to the 308s.
Yeah, right.
But they also do use the copper tip rounds. In my research, especially from older Indian tribes, they claim that copper was poisonous to the blood system of these Nephilim for whatever reason. So the ancient Indians would even they found even in areas where there was no copper, they would do trading from other parts of the country to get copper. And they would make copper arrows, copper spears, and all that because they said that's what was effective. And I've heard of SF teams especially about Lyndon Moulton Howe talking about a Navy SEAL team in Antarctica, where they found an underground, basically pyramid base that had giants, and the giants, some were in like stasis pods, but some became animated at the point that they entered this place, and they got into a firefight, and they said that they switched to copper rounds
Right.
in their system, and still had a heck of a time trying to deal with these things. These
Yeah.
things are yeah, they're huge. I've heard it.
Well, what I
Go
was
ahead.
told about the strength of the Nephilim giants. I mean, put it kind of in a context like this. So if we measure man's strength compared to a gorilla, man's strength, say, is like 10 on a scale, like 10. A gorilla's like 800. A Nephilim is right around about 8 to 9,000. So they can lift about 9,000 times more than their own weight. Um, so that's pretty insane. That's almost like Incredible Hulk strength.
That is incredible whole strength. Yeah, right. And you think with that type of mass, the little bitty rounds don't do much to harm them. That's like the story with the from L.A. Marzulli with the giant of Kandahar, right? So
Mhm.
you had the team go missing, and they sent an SF team out there to search for the missing team. And they came to the base of this cave and found the TA-50, which is all their gear, including radio equipment. And they said that this giant came out of a cave with a pike, with a spear, stabbed one of the SF guys in the sternum and lifted him off the ground. And the rest of the team just unloaded on this thing. And it took everything they had. Fortunately, one of them had a 50 cal, and they were able to finally bring it down and kill it with this thing. But they said it took everything they had to do it until that 50 cal could get into a position to take a shot. And
Yeah.
which is basically the 50 cal is like an anti-tank round. And especially they use like depleted uranium and explosive stuff and these things for piercing tanks.
Yeah.
It's to be a vehicle destabilizer, like destroying a tank or a deuce and a half, choppers, that kind of thing for these rounds. So um,
Yeah.
makes more combat effective. But they said, and then there was testimony from one of the SF guys that was there with L.A. Marzulli, later a pilot, chopper pilot, did the same thing also at the base where it was brought to, gave testimony to the same thing. Now, they all said that the giant had red hair, 6 fingers, 6 toes, and double rows of teeth.
Yep.
That is a perfect description of the Nephilim in the Old Testament of the Bible, that
Mhm.
they had red hair, double rows of teeth, 6 fingers, and 6 toes. In fact, when we all grew up as kids and we were told the Indians go, how
Yeah.
it wasn't about a peace thing. It was to count your fingers from a distance to tell if you were human before they got too close to you. That's what all that was about,
Yep.
you know? So, but yeah, that is amazing. So when you talked about the different types, what could you go into more detail about the different classes? So you said there was a domesticated class and a wild class, which is basically like the Bigfoot. What were the descriptions of the different ones that you were able to gather?
Um. Yeah. So you've got your Bigfoot. So the Bigfoot classifications is more like the wild but domesticated. They've lived out in the woods. They're usually woodsy, kind of out, out in the mountain regions or like in Seattle or whatever. Um, they live more off the land. Um, they're typically more non-violent. If they're provoked, then yeah, they're gonna kill people. But then there's the other classes. The second one, I should say, the most wildest one is you're going to see are going to be more from the desert or arid or places like you see in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, and those are more true biblical Nephilim giants. Um, the more mutated ones you're going to find in other regions like in Siberia, here in the U.S., South America. Um, they have people have different names for it, but um, the other ones have, I don't know how the best way to explain it. The other ones are kind of like they're not totally skinless or hairless, excuse me, not totally hairless. They have some hair. Kind of imagine some hairy guy on a beach, and he's got a lot of hair on his back. But he's not hairy enough to the point that he's like a wolf man or something, or a Sasquatch. But that's kind of a best way to describe it. They're a little more sickly, but they're extremely aggressive. Like you said, they got all of them have double row set of teeth. This one is more particular. It's got black eyes. It's kind of no pupil. It's kind of all black. So it kind of operates more in the dark rather than the daylight. Some people call them golems. That's what the Hebrew tribe, they call them golems. So this is kind of the one I was telling you about that I seen. And I was told by the scientists that it was very unusual to see that particular type out in the woods, especially.
That type referring to the one you saw in the cage?
Yeah, so the ones that we see, like you see out in the caves, right? You're not going to see those usually typically here in America. Or like the second one I told you about, that's little. I think the best way to describe it is what's his name? Lord of the Rings, the guy that's always talking about his precious ring.
Gollum.
Gollum. Okay. So it looks like Gollum with some hair on it, but he's about 20 feet tall. His facial features, he's got a little bit of
people call that like the rake.
What's that?
People call that like the rake.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people even in the crypto community that do shows like this, they told me, "Oh, John, that was creepypasta stories. That's not real." But man, I've heard story after story after story of people who are saying they're seeing things that are described just like that, mostly hairless and completely albino white, and it's sometimes the size of a human, but sometimes huge, like 10, 20 feet tall, huge.
I know there's one that's so they call it the gray cryptoid. And the gray cryptoid is what everybody associates as an alien. So if we've seen the movies where what's this? I'm trying to think what his name is.
What was the movie about?
So the guy used to be a pastor because he quit being he used to be a priest, but he quit being a priest because his wife had died. And
I got it. Mel Gibson.
Yes. So in that particular movie, where you see at the end, you see the big cryptoid holding his son, and turns around and you get those big beady eyes.
That was a good movie with M. Night Shyamalan. No, not M. Night Shyamalan. The Mel Gibson. I'm drawing a blank in the audience. What's that movie with Mel Gibson? And
Signal or
the Signal? Yeah, I think it was Signals. And the River Phoenix brother was in it. Joaquin.
Yeah.
Played the brother.
Yeah.
I remember they were wearing the tinfoil hats. That was great. Yeah.
So that one is one classification. Those are, you'll see them more towards the south, like Southern America.
Signs. Someone said Signs. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah. So
Signs was the name of the movie.
So the best way I can describe it is this: if you see them hairless, they're usually located in where the equator is or south of the equator. If you see them with a little more hair, they're kind of above the equator. You see the ones that are really hairy, those are the ones in the far north.
Have you ever heard of the movie Descent?
I have not.
I was actually in Los Angeles and went to a special premiere for that movie with the people that made it before it was released out to the public. But anyway, in the movie Descent, it was about some modern team. It was a team of women spelunklers that were just, close-knit group of friends. And as a hobby, they would go spelunkling together. And they found this uncharted cave and went spelunking, and it turned into a nightmare because they had this hairless blind creatures that had some kind of like echolocation that they would do clicks with their mouths, and just like but like hundreds of them, and they were cannibals. And that's what that movie's about. Well, just yesterday I heard a report in Oregon that there was a mountain range out there where people had said that they had an encounter with things like that coming out the ground.
Oh wow, I wouldn't be too surprised.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, with all the stuff today, it's insane. The one thing I wanted to ask you is more about so the one that you saw in the dumb, and by the way, just for the audience, dumb means deep underground military base. All right, that's what that stands for. But the one that you saw in the dumb, can you give us a paint a mental picture for us of what you saw when you encountered this thing? What was it doing? What did it look like? What aspects did it have? What stood out to you? That kind of thing.
Well, what stood out to me, it looks a lot like, kind of like Gollum, but hairy.
But hairy.
Yeah,
When you say
it's got a beard on it,
okay,
I have some hair on the upper back. The hair on the side comes down to about here, but there was patches all over, especially like on the arm, upper arm. There was no hair, but you get down towards
mangy,
here, it's pretty hairy. Um, the big thing that stood out to me was, at first, it was an inanimate object. It was just sitting there motionless. The smell, it's so undeniable. I mean, if you ever walked outside and you could smell that, you could smell a skunk in the air, especially in the
right?
winter
Right.
night. It just pops, and you're like, okay, there's a skunk nearby. Well, what's this thing? Once those doors open, it hits you like a brick wall. I mean, you're just kind of like, what the? You get all something dying,
Right.
and you
Yeah.
walk down and you see this, and you're trying to, you're trying to figure out what this thing is. Is
Mm,
it a statue or an art piece or whatever? But once it starts moving, um, that gets a little pretty unnerving,
right.
considering that we have M4s, and we're using 5.56 rounds. It still makes you feel really inadequate once it starts screaming, and the
Right.
sound coming out of that thing. Holy cow! Um, my ears were ringing for like 2 days.
Hmm.
I can still hear that sound to this day. It doesn't take much. Um, but
And
if I,
that's the sound that made it roared when your buddy reacted.
yeah, he just kind of like gasped,
And
and all
they
of a
said,
sudden,
"Don't gasp," and he gasped.
yeah, gasp, yeah, and
And they I've
but we
heard
just,
before people say that they can actually smell DNA. It's not
yeah,
like us. They
yeah,
have senses that we don't. And one of those senses is they can actually smell DNA. They can actually track a person's DNA in a forest through smell. They can isolate you,
yep.
and so they can react to that. I guess that's part of the reason why they told them say don't gasp, other than trying to draw a reaction from this thing. Was it
There,
wearing any type of clothing?
well, it depends on which one. If you get more like the one out in Calahander, Afghanistan, yeah, it's gonna have some loincloth or some basic, Now you get into the ones that are more towards the equator. No, they don't wear any clothes at all. Um, they're they're
What
more
about the one in the dumb?
they're more like in a more of a primitive state of mind. Where you get to the other ones that are more domesticated, more docile, more compliant. They're really compliant. Um, yes, they do wear clothes, but that's only because they're trying to fit in with the human society. Well, who's controlling them anyway? They're trying to give out an outward appearance that they're not a threat. But
I've seen at least 3 to 4 different military photographs of giants in uniform marching with our armies.
yeah,
One was walking in a formation in front of a tank, and this guy was obviously like 10 foot plus. I mean, made the tank looks like, I mean, he was the size of the tank if he lay down. Um, and you see him marching in formation. There's the famous video that there was a, I don't know, like some type of like riots going on in some city and stuff, and you had the police in there, and there's video footage of one of these people walking around with the police and the military in uniform that was obviously like 3 times the size of any of the other soldiers.
yeah,
Um,
those are much more domesticated. Those are more they're bred out. They bred out more of the primitive state out of them and become so much more domesticated. They the big problem with them is their speech is not they're not able to articulate like you and I can. They can speak. I think it's up to like 350 words, but they're usually more compliance set words. If they understand what what they're being told, or what they hear. If they're given an order to do something, they it's a very limited speech. But the body language, it's all the same. The body language, speaks a lot louder anyway. And so anybody that's actually working with them or handling them have to pay very close attention to the body language in case they decide to revert back to the normal primitive state, which they can.
Right.
But the conditions have to be met in order for that to happen. So it just kind of, I don't know. It's I know some of the older pictures where you'll see them, they're like 15 feet tall or whatever. Much older pictures where they're walking down the street in some kind of a parade fashion, and those are more heavily domesticated. They think themselves as human beings, and oftentimes, this is what's interesting. So the scientist told me once that you can tell who has a Nephilim gene in their DNA. If you were to go and you do that my 1, 2, 3, whatever, okay,
the 21 and me.
Yeah. So the reason why the government has that is so they can track which person has a Nephilim gene. Okay. So, like in my family, for example, my mom's side of the family, my father's side of the family, everybody is like 5'2", 5'3". Okay. On my mom's side, I have one uncle that was 6'5", but everybody else is short. So I'm 6'5". All right. So in my family, we would be considered giants. Now, do we have a Nephilim gene? No, we don't. Nephilim, and according to the scientists, in order for you to have a Nephilim gene, you have to be, I believe it's 9.5 feet or greater. So if you're 9.5 feet or greater, then you have the Nephilim gene.
I have a sheriff buddy down the road from me now. He was born with 6 fingers and 6 toes. It's normal height, but 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Yeah.
They actually removed a digit when he was born just so he would be normal.
I know a buddy of mine whose daughter has two sets of teeth on top and bottom. And
that's definitely Nephilim. That's Nephilim.
Yeah, she went in and I guess to the dentist, and they had to pull out one row of teeth and bottom and top just to have a normal life.
Right.
But she does have a mental, what do you call it? A mental capacity diminished. They've given her classifications for mental disorders. She acts in more of a primitive state of mind. She's super aggressive. She will strike at somebody without warning. And it got really bad. I mean, it got totally bad to the point that he actually had to have her committed.
Oh, wow.
Just for them to be able to deal with her. And then over the time, they were able to teach her how to be a little bit more domesticated. But even when she was just a little kid, I'm talking like 8 or 9 years old, she's already got a knife at her dad's throat. I mean, wow. So, and it's just, I wouldn't be too surprised that if she had the Nephilim gene, because, that's.
Well, after times past, there's probably large portions of the population that have some degree. All of us probably have some degree of tainted blood from this kind of stuff. It's just, some people are going to have it, and more direct lineages are going to have more of it, kind of thing. And the world elites, they certainly try to stick with their own bloodlines as much as possible. One thing I wanted to bring up, since we're on the topic of giants, was the fact of the news that's been going on with the shooting at the Miami Mall. So what do you know about that?
So the Miami Mall is actually located under right above a underground dome. Here's my thing. Working as an armed security officer to try to keep these domes secure, there is absolutely no way a Nefilism could get out and start wandering through. You have to have a key passcode in order to be able to access every single door that's in those places.
Plus armed security, right?
So if those things got out, there's two of them, as I understand. Just looking at the footage of it, I can kind of get a pretty good idea what classification that they are. They're more of the hairless. They're more of the hairless classification, so they would come from more around the equator, more warmer climates.
There was a witness I saw today on TikTok that said that he was there when it took place, and he said he saw the whole thing from start to finish, kind of thing. He said from his this guy's this guy paints on walls for a living, but he's like a professional artist painting on walls. But he was artistic. He even drew out a picture of how it all went down. He said that in the mall, he was on an upper level, and then you had the lower level, open deck and lower level below him.
Mm-hmm.
He said what he saw. Now they said that kids had started this with sticks and they caused a little riot or whatever, which we know is BS because there was over 100 police units there, and that that's like a terrorist event, not a few kids with sticks, which would be like 4 or 5 cars kind of thing situation. Right. But anyway, this guy said, and I don't know how credible he is as a source, but he said he was there for the whole thing. He said there were these young kids that were talking with each other. He said they were pretty well dressed, but they were young kids. They were goofing off, and they said they pulled out a device that looked like a transistor radio, for lack of a better explanation. And he says the other ones were telling him, "Go ahead, it's safe here. It's safe here. Start it," like egging him on. And one kid, they said, like plugged it in or something and started this device. And he said what was weird is some of them had goggles that looked like welding goggles. And he said he thought that stuck out to him, but otherwise they were normally dressed. And he said they were dressed like clean cut, not like thugs or anything. But he said they started this device, and the device, he said, literally created a portal. And he said, and he described the entire portal, like how at first it started out just as light, then it made the circle, then it started to become translucent, and it put off, like he said there was some kind of like spark looking things that were coming from around it and all. And then he said he saw these creatures basically coming through this portal. And then that's when people started to react and freak out. Now, other testimony I heard from other people that said they saw this thing, they didn't claim to see any portals or anything, but they said that they saw creatures that were 7 to 10 feet tall, multiple creatures that seemed to have a cloaking system similar to like the Predator movie. And they said that also they would phase out where it would disappear, but then reappear in another location. And you could tell this thing because of its distortion. And they said that they didn't appear threatening. They didn't appear like they cared about anything that was going on. They were walking around, even in that video in front of the police vehicles. They got that one on camera. And this guy said that it was some supernatural stuff, he thought, and everyone was panicking and just running. He said most people were not filming because they were too scared. They were in fight or flight mode, and they were just trying to get away. Other people got so scared they pulled out guns and started shooting at these things, which they said had no effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
But they said that later the news reported firecrackers. It wasn't any firecrackers. People got scared, pulled their pistols. I carry a gun everywhere I go. Yeah. If I saw an alien coming down the street, I'd be scared too, So people pulled out guns in the mall and started shooting this thing. And they weren't trying to shoot at other people. They were trying to shoot at this creature. So, but they also said that the police stopped everybody that they could, and they searched their phones and removed video footage and photographs before they would let them go. So it was a major ordeal. And now you got to think too, the media loves nothing more than something like a public shooting so they can start demanding gun control and take away everyone's rights to have self-defense and protection, especially from crazies in the world today, or creatures in the world today, if you will. and yet they're not reporting it as any type of shooting. Oh, it was fireworks. It was just fireworks. You know what I mean? So there was a major cover up. It's not what they're telling us. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a military base or dumb connection right there, which to these maglevs, which, like you said, there does seem to be a connection. I've heard others say that between all of these malls, most malls, there is some kind of a connection to these systems. So
Yeah, there's if you can kind of see in the bottom of the picture, you'll see where where the red dots are. That's actually where the mall locations are, or the domes are, and you'll see the tunnel systems that interconnect with one another. So what I can tell you, what people were seeing is, so like I said, scientists been doing a lot of DNA mutations with these nebulisms. Now, the ones that are more closer to the equator, they have a chameleon effect, which means they can phase themselves to mimic their surroundings. So it can the camouflage look to appear and then disappear. So what you're seeing is one disappearing, you see another one appear somewhere else, or maybe even closer to somebody. That's the multiple nebulisms in motion. So these are the ones that are definitely kind of impervious to small arm rounds. So it takes
over the summer there was the attack in Peru. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
The attack in Peru. Most of the people that this summer they actually nicknamed the local villagers nicknamed them the face eaters because for some reason they were removing the skin off of people's faces to where it looked like just a perfectly clean skeleton skull, like you would see on a wall or something, you know.
Right.
And they were finding a couple of bodies of these things after people had encounters with these things, and they had an ability to cloak just like the Predator in the Predator movie. And not only that, they said they had some type of force field around them where small arms had zero effect whatsoever.
Yeah,
and that
it's not so much as they had, some kind of a force, a force field. It's just that their skin is almost impervious to any kind of small arm rounds. I mean, these again, you have to go back to the copper 50 caliber rounds in order to bring these things down. But they have a tendency to regenerate very quickly, and they have that chameleon effect. So,
I talked to a buddy of mine one time, Jody Cook, who runs North American Dogman Project, and they've done some great work over the years with their stuff. But he told me one time that some federal agents pulled him aside and showed him photographs of skeletal remains of like dogmen, and he said, "Man, the breastplate was like a solid bone, completely solid bone." And he said, and this stuff has a tensillary strength of like beyond steel, you know? Right. So that's why you hear so many accounts of people shooting these things at point blank range. And they said it sounds like plinking a target, just ding, 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 ding. And they don't even flinch. They don't even flinch. And when a buddy of mine got into a shootout with one of these things with a military style team, same thing. They said they were seeing tissue and blood splatter, and this thing wasn't phased at all until they were able to hit it with basically almost a modified 50 caliber round. And all of a sudden he said that got its attention, you know. But it's not practical for people to buy or carry 50 calibers. It's just they're too big and heavy. Even Chris Kyle, was serving as a sniper at the time when the 50 cals became big from Barrett and stuff, and he didn't want to carry one because he said that they were just too big and too heavy. Okay. Even the rounds, I mean, the rounds are like that long. I mean, it's just not practical. I mean, you can carry 5, and you can only carry so much weight. Not to mention the weight of the gun itself.
Right.
Plus accuracy. I mean, if you're trying to shoot distance, it's one thing. If you're trying to shoot large targets, if you're trying to do precision shooting, it's probably not the best for that,
No.
So,
no, but yeah. I mean, if you want to stop a vehicle and you want to punch a hole in the engine block, then I would go with something like that. But yeah, I But that's that's the interesting thing about that is when you're dealing with Nefilisms, what I was told was the best way to subdue them was through electrical charge. That's something that they're not impervious to. So it takes quite a bit of an amperage to set up kind of a some type of they have some kind of a mat or like those road spikes they put out to stop vehicles. It's kind of like the same kind of thing, but it's got a lot of amperage on it. So when they step on it, it's like a taser.
We use things like that in the military for mine clearing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I have not heard that one before. That's a good one.
Yeah.
What did they say? Any other type of weaknesses they might have?
Water. They're terrified of water. And I think this has to go back to the days of Noah, the flooding of when Noah and his family entered the ark and the world flooded. So in order to effectively kill them, you have to submerge them underwater. And the way they said how they put it to me was, as soon as they know they're going underwater, they kind of roll their eyes in the back of their head and they close their eyelids because they know it's they have, especially if they're kind of dropping them out of the middle of an ocean, they know they're screwed.
I hear that's where the Smithsonian dumps all the bones. They disappear them in the ocean.
Yeah. So, and the Indians knew this. My Indian tribe told me that a lot of times they would lure them to a cliff and try to trip them up and get them to fall off a cliff, and then from there, that's where they go and pretty much start, digging up the earth around it, throwing it on top. That puts them in kind of a dormant state of sleep. But if they know that they're close to water, maybe a cliff to the water, they'll try to lower it to that area, and then they'll have one Indian will kind of sacrifice himself for the greater good, but they try to get him to trip him and get him to fall over into the ocean. But that's the only effective way to really kill them. And that's how they used to do it. That was back in the day when they didn't have the modern technology like we do today. So,
right. Yeah, but they're also talking about putting us back in the dark ages and knocking out our power. So that's something else they keep putting out in the public domain, like one of the plans for us. And the Bible talks about this time. The Bible talks about Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be again at the end. So what does that mean? You have to understand what was going on in the days of Noah.
So like at the days of Noah, if you take a look at the conditions at that time, so mankind was actually not so more domesticated. There was some domestication going on, but there was so much of this mix of the Nefilim, DNA mixed with humans at the time. So a lot of the men in particular, they started becoming more aggressive by nature. And so they would have a lot of, they call them like clan fights. So they would have, groups of clans. And then during the day, they would get together and they would, one-on-one, they would start to fight each other to the death, right? And there was so much bloodshed going on. There was so much perversion within the DNA. Noah and his family were the only ones that had the pure human DNA.
The Bible says that Noah was pure in his generations. That didn't just mean he was a holy person. It meant his genealogy was pure blood.
Right. I mean, Noah was a drunk. He was an alcoholic, and I can see why, because at that time,
he invented alcohol, as far as we know.
He was tasked with cleaning up and removing the dead bodies and things like this. This was his job that his brother had given him to do. So he had kind of gotten to the point of being used to this as a means of survival, for personal survival, for his family's survival, because there was no other place for them to go. So he drank a lot. That just became his sort of coping strategy. But him and his family, they never mixed bloodlines with anybody else. I think he was kind of pretty much the last of the bloodlines of the human DNA. So God knew that it would end with Noah's children. And so that's for the reason why is that he knew that the Watchers were trying to corrupt the human DNA, the pure human DNA. So that's why he flooded the world to get rid of didn't get rid of all of them. But here's the interesting about this is this. So the four horsemen of the apocalypse are indeed Nephilim giants. They are the originals. They cannot be killed by water. However, they were buried in the Euphrates River.
Yep.
In a dormant state.
Yep.
So once the Euphrates River, the Revelation talks about when the sign of the time of Revelations.
Revelations 16, 12, 14, or 16. I get those mixed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the river dries up, then these four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Horsemen of the apocalypse, right?
Yeah, and they're actually in all essence they're actually Nephilisms.
If you saw the intro to my show, I've got that in the intro. The four horsemen. Yeah. And that's the purpose of this channel, is trying to talk about these subjects, but to try to tie it into what time are we in? We're in the time of the four horsemen, which, by the way, are named war, pestilence, famine, conquering. That means war. All right. So they're talking about basically World War III coming, which a lot of scholars talk about, and theologians, that they say that the Bible in Revelations divided into 10 kingdoms, which the UN has done for us now, and 3 of those kingdoms will go to war with each other. One will fall immediately, and that I claim is the United States, as well as many others. And then they say a new one will emerge out of Europe that will dominate all the remaining ones. Yep. And that will be the one world government, and that will be headed by the Antichrist, yep, which is one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's attributed as the white horse, right? And then it says his name is Death. Why is it Death? Because it says in the Bible, the four horsemen of the apocalypse are going to kill 1/3 of humanity. All right. So that said, his name is Death. But then it also says, and hell follows with him. Well, what does that mean? And what that means is the keys of the bottomless pit were given to one person, not God, because he's God. That's like the trump card. But they were given to one person, and I claim that is the Antichrist. And that's why he's so important, because once they have the Antichrist in position, he can do what the goal was in the past. And what the goal was in the past was Nimrod after the flood of Noah. In fact, going back just a little bit further, based on what you were saying, so God started a war amongst the giants, and that was the clash of the Titans. All right. That killed off most of them and all the big ones. And then God started the flood to wipe out all the rest, where we've got, even civilian accounts of in the epic story of Gilgamesh in Sanskrit, cuneiform, city of Nineveh, library of Nineveh. Anyway, that said, so God created the flood. Now, after the flood, the giants came back somehow. This is called the second incursion theory. And Rob Skibo, I was talking about before, talks about 4 leading theories on the second incursion theory. The main theory being that we already had, now Noah and his 6 children had pure genealogy, but his children were sent to get wives before entering the boat. They did not have pure genealogy. They did not have pure blood. And so there is a thing, and there's a suggestion that through basically choices we make can trigger different genes. And we see in the Philistines, giants started coming back to the surface, like you see the account of David and Goliath, right? That came out of the Philistines, right? But also there's one historic Jewish, in the Jewish kind of cabal thing, there's ancient stories that they claim that one Nephilim survived by basically taxing on Noah's Ark, and that was Og, king of Bashan. What's interesting is we've got accounts of Og, king of Bashan before the flood and after the flood. He died after the flood. So there is some credence to that being possible. The Bible says his bed was made of iron so it could support his weight, and it was 14 feet long because that's how tall he was. So obviously a giant. Now, also, one of the sons of Noah, I believe it was Dan, if I remember correctly. Remember he caused the sin against Noah?
Right. Yes.
Yep. And so what happened now, Scholars argue, well, was it homosexuality? Was it incest? We don't know, but it was a sin in their eyes and before God. So Noah did not curse his son because God had just blessed his sons, him and his sons. So he taken kind of a humility into what God blessed, he wouldn't curse, but he cursed his son's son and his son's grandson.
Yeah.
Now his son's son was Cush, and his son's grandson was Nimrod. Now Nimrod's not a name, it's a title. It means great hunter before the Lord, which sounds favorable, but actually means one who makes war against God and his people. All right. Nimrod, who claimed he was a Nephilim giant, or he claims he was a Nephilim. He says he was 3 parts divine and 1 part kind of human. And he built the Tower of Babel with fallen technology with the help of the fallen angels. His goal, he was angry at God for creating the flood and wiping out his kin. So his goal was to create the Stargate, if you will, with the Tower of Babel. It was not a tower to reach the heavens. It was a Stargate to reach the heavens, right? But God intervened because God said, now is not the time, the day, the year, or the hour. And God also said they have the ability to do what they are trying to do. Why? Because the keys of the bottomless pit were given to one, all right? And Nimrod, I claim, was that one. So God intervened and changed the languages and destroyed the tower, if you will. But come again, full circle, my trusty duct tape, right? First FSF tool. So God stopped the original because they had the ability to do what they were trying to do. But now we've come full circle, and they've rebuilt the Tower of Babel, I argue, today, which I claim is the Saturn Hadron Collider in Switzerland, France. And they need to bring back the Antichrist because he is the one that has the keys to then open the bottomless pit and bring forth those that were in prison, those that were locked up. Many times when they find these giants, they say that they said, why are you messing with me? It's not yet my time. Well, obviously they're waiting for a specific appointed time to when they're going to be loose to do their worst. In fact, that reminds me, did you hear the story of the Euphrates River, of the locals saying that there was a prison there, and that they said that underground there, U.S. soldiers claim that they found a giant in chains down there.
Yeah.
You hear about that story?
I did, yeah.
They said the chains were enormous. Like the chains were like the size of a school bus for a length. This was huge, but this thing had wings too. I mean, it had full out wings. And there was a story, I've heard multiple stories from contractors that said they were in that area and heard these stories about this thing. And I heard one person claim that he was a big Christian that was in the military. And he said that he went into this chamber and found this thing chained up to a wall. And he said the thing said, "What are you doing here? It's not yet my time." And that's what it said to him. And he promptly left.
I would too.
Right. So, yeah, I would too. But that is a story I've heard multiple accounts of. Not to mention all the stories you hear now where people are like, "Holy crap!" Put your phone next to this hole in the ground of the Euphrates, and you hear like chains and moaning and rustling, and man, that like makes all the hair on the back of your neck stand up. That is some creepy stuff. And this isn't like some Hollywood production. This is a little kid who sticks his phone in a hole.
This was in Russia, and where they were, I believe they were.
That's another account. I'm saying right now in the Euphrates, you can look it up online, and people go stick their phones in holes just to the surface, and you hear that. What you're talking about in Russia was something that happened like in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, where Russia did a deep drilling experiment.
Yeah.
And they were trying to go super deep for the time, and their drill got ate up, and they sent a microphone down there. And all of a sudden they heard these things that, for lack of a better word, they can say they only heard the sounds of hell. And you can look that up online. Look at the Russian drilling sounds of hell. And Boy, I tell you, that's one of the scariest things I've ever heard in my entire life.
I do know that U.S. government actually got access to that sound, and they actually employ that sound coupled with, uh, voices of children that speak in that particular dialogue or that particular language. They give it a dialogue to, you know, this child would read from a script, and they would kind of do some editing on it, and they mix it with that particular sound, and they would use that as a counterintelligence offense to drive certain indigenous people out of an area. Because if you think about this, so from the age of 5 all the way up to the age of 35, they're the most superstitious people in my age category. Anything after 35, most people kind of just say, you know what, I'm not scared of this just because it's a sound, right? But you get your more of a younger, more fighting age males, they're a lot more superstitious to that particular sound. What's interesting is that decibel of that sound coming from that deep drill hole, that decibel, it hits that part of the brain that frightens and terrors people. And we have not been able to duplicate that level of the sound and on a stability way. We've been able to get to that point, but we can't keep that sound, that pitch, or that, we want to call it, that range on a consistent level. And so what got my attention was when they were dropping that microphone, they got 13 minutes of that sound before the recorded temperatures was 1,000 degrees. And that was just at the length of level that they were at. And so they calculated that if they were to go to the bottom of where that cavern is, they said it's about the temperature of the sun. So it's so hot.
Wow.
And there's no way they can get any kind of equipment down there beyond what that microphone was at. So
yeah, that's what they were saying. It kept eating up even the drill bits. So they were trying to see what was going on. They said that there was a technique they had for sending microphones that they could detect like even gas pockets and stuff. I'm not sure how that works, but that's what they were looking for. That, and for some reason they thought sound could help them clear the blockage. And they said this is standard practice. And then they said, and they were drilling like super, super deep. It was like one of the deepest drills of the time. And that's when they heard those crazy, awful sounds. Right. Yeah, it sounds like the sounds of hell. It sounds like multiple screaming and agony and terror in a very large space. I mean, it sounds just awful. I mean,
that is scary.
And I mean, there's other stories that people like went crazy after hearing that and not being able to make sense of it. Not to mention, also, it reminds me in Russia and other places, but particularly in Russia, they've uncovered these statues relatively recently that are statues of angels, except like the clothing is real, and the statues look like surprisingly like lifelike and eerie, almost like it's an entity that was actually frozen, kind of thing. You know what I mean? And the government was like called out and took over everything. Like it was big deal stuff. That was going around for a while.
One of my archaeologist friends was talking to me about when they found the tomb of Gilgamesh, right, and how his body was perfectly preserved.
Perfectly.
There's a piece of the story they didn't disclose to the public, but they disclosed it within the scientific community. But he had shared with me a picture showing the steps that are going down into his tomb was all made out of marble. Okay, and the cut was so precise. But what got their attention was on the left side of the steps, going about halfway down, the marble was melted. It looked like it just turned into kind of like jello, like dripping water, and it was melted. And so they went back and they were trying to do their calculations of how hot does the marble have to get to the point that it starts to turn into a liquid state. And so they compare that to how many kilotons of a nuclear warhead what we would have to kind of ignite in order for something like this to happen. And so they said basically if you took the Sarah bomb, which is the largest nuclear weapon in our, I guess, in human race arsenal today, which I believe is right around 500 megatons, and that is the largest in existence. But this particular bomb could wipe out 90% of Europe. That's how big it is. It would have to get to that level of degree of heat in order to scorch out those steps to begin with. And so I do remember reading about Gilgamesh during the time of Gilgamesh, right after his death. There was a great war, and they believed that there was an atomic bomb of some sort that had wiped out an entire race of civilizations. And some people believe, some scientists believe that was the reason why they did that, was to preserve the secret of Gilgamesh, to make sure that nobody, knows about that ancient race.
Oppenheimer, the new Oppenheimer movie that came out, right? Oppenheimer said that there was evidence in our atmosphere and its different soil samples and stuff that atomic nuclear bombs have been set on Earth already before our modern times.
Yeah.
So he's like, this is not a new thing. This is a rediscovery.
Yeah. So see, that's the thing about the human race that we tend to forget. So the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And that is the most accurate statement, because even working in as a military contractor in clandestine, we have access to certain information. So, and a lot of it we get access to, like stuff that archaeologists discover. They share with us, because when we're going out on operational missions, they have to tell us what our threat levels are, identify what kind of threats we have to deal with, and certain things. And so we're going into a certain area that most mankind doesn't have access to, but we're going there to collect samples or whatever, or whatever our mission is. We have to have certain equipment with us to detect certain things. And so we know that mankind is just in the process that it keeps repeating itself over and over. And a part of the reason is because what I've discovered is that so Ramses II, he lived to be 69 years old. Now, he's the same age as Moses. So at 40 years old, Moses went back to Egypt to free his people. And the reason why Ramses was so upset and so angry after Moses has left with his people, which they couldn't, they tried to go after them and then realized that they couldn't, So Ramses II wanted to find a way to exact this revenge on the world. And so he had sent two of his scribes to modern-day Iraq, which is the location of Library of Alexandria. And at the time, mankind was keeping records of history, of historical accounts of things, technology. They had access to everything. So the two scribes went there and basically stole all of the papers, and burnt down whatever they felt was more insignificant. They burnt down the library so that no one will have access to this stuff anymore. They brought it back. They sat down. They went through the dead languages, the Sanskrit languages, which they knew at the time. Translated everything into Egyptian language. And so Ramses II became a scholar and started studying everything that they had brought back, and came up with a formulated plan to control the future generations. And he does this by a 100-year cycle, which they go into where his generations would acquire wealth over and over again, but they would use that wealth not for selfish reasons, but they would use that wealth as a means of control of entire generations of people. And then when they get into this point where civilizations they've kind of fed a lot of control mechanisms, so they're deriving this civilization to come to a collapse, and then they're going to have funds, which they do by siphoning off the current system, so they can reestablish a new civilizations of the leftovers of people and to bring about. We can go back and look at history that we see all these civilizations from that time going forward, how all these civilizations have come and gone. And what was interesting in my studies anyway, with all of this, how this all ties in. So the UFOs, the whole big UFO conspiracy. So the technology of UFOs have been around for thousands of years. And this is all this information, it comes from the Watchers. The Watchers are the ones that imparted all this wisdom onto mankind. And God knew that we shouldn't have all of this knowledge of all of this stuff. And the reason being is because of individuals like Ramses II, who took this information, compartmentalized it.
Weaponize it.
And so his generations of kinship would be the ones that would rise to power, kind of in the shadows, and they would compartmentalize everything. So it would make it almost difficult to trace back to that family. So when the collapse of that civilization happens, all of the knowledge or the education gets kind of washed out because the natural events, they call it. And when they bring about a new civilization, they start feeding them small doses only of what they want them to know. And then they get back into the control system of what they can know, what they have access to, or things like this. And so they teamed up with, our clandestine services here in the United States, going back as far as the 1920s, 1930s. And Tesla was, believe it or not, Tesla had access to that information, some of that information, but the rest of it kind of figured out how to kind of put components together. But the UFOs have been around since the beginning of time, and that's because of the Watchers. They pass that information on to people.
Elon Musk recently said on Joe Rogan's podcast, he said, listen, I'm in the aerospace community. If anyone knows about this stuff, it would be me. You know what I mean? And he basically said, aliens have been here longer than we have. It's not a matter of, when's an alien going to show up? They've always been here, always. And what was interesting about that is I listened to Mr. Bigelow of Bigelow Aerospace, another aerospace company. Again, if someone's going to know, it's going to be those people, right? And he was in an interview one time, and people asked him, well, when are we going to finally have, an alien show up and introduce themselves? And he's like, who's to say that they aren't already here and haven't been here as long as we have or longer? You know what I mean? He was basically saying they're here and they've always been here,
Yeah, the aliens are actually the angelic beings. They're the Watchers. These are also the Nephilisms. So I'm just kind of sharing what I know. I'm working in the dumps. And what the scientists were telling me is that the alien species are the aliens themselves, the gray aliens, all the different kinds of ones. They're all actually descendants of the Watchers, and the Watchers are angels. And so these beings, these are the origins or the beginning of the alien space race. Okay. And all of their technology and everything is derived from them. So this notion about aliens coming from far distant galaxies is actually a source of manipulation to the public masses to detract them from the truth, where this actual source is coming from. That's why a lot of people believe that aliens come from, on distant planets and near Planet X or near Nibiru or whatever. So to understand this is that Lucifer is the prince of the air. He's also the prince of Earth. So he controls the airwaves. He controls all the electronics, airwaves, all the digital airwaves, everything. So he has the ability to manipulate, astronomers when they're trying to send signals out into distant planets. They're kind of getting these frequencies of, trying to determine what the compound ingredients of that particular planet is. It gases, is it liquid, if there's life on it, or there's intelligent life anyway. So that being said, we're still kind of on this thinking is that there's aliens out there, um, but in fact, we understand who the aliens are, where they come from. They've been here for thousands of years, going back as far as about 6,000 years, but they've been around since all this time, since the days of Enoch, and um, they're really good. They're master manipulators to try to trick people into thinking that this is some kind of a superior alien race.
You ever heard of Val Valiant Thor, the stranger at the Pentagon?
Yes.
There are multiple accounts of people that claim that that was a real deal, including Phil Schneider, including who was the author of Behold the Pale Horse, William Cooper, and others I've heard over the years that claim that that was absolutely real. He claimed he was he was an alien. And he claimed he was an angel, and that he was the only one I've heard of that supported God and Jesus Christ and talked about all that. Where all these other so-called alien groups, say the opposite, or they say that they created us, not God, kind of thing.
Right. So that particular individual, he was truly one of the watchmen, one of the fallen angels. Just understand this: fallen angels, they didn't die in the flood because they don't die. The only way they can die is in the end days when Jesus comes back, sets up his kingdom on earth. He's going to have a lake of fire that's going to be created just for them, and as well as all of those who have rejected Christ. So that's the only way they can die. The only thing is that they can be imprisoned on the, here, just like the four horsemen. They're actually buried in
they're imprisoned, right?
The Euphrates River. But there's other locations where these fallen angels are situated. But there are other lower level fallen angels that are just kind of, the run of the mill. They have.
The Book of Enoch said that they were imprisoned in different places, and some of them imprisoned themselves.
Yeah, because they're the thing is what the angels is even fallen angels or demons, as some people refer them to. They still can't. Even though they're rebelled, they're still under the Almighty's direction as to what they can and can't do.
Well, even in refusing to serve, you're still serving.
Exactly.
You're still doing God's plan and God's will. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about is before you had brought up the zombie virus. Is there anything else you can tell us about that? Because that's kind of big news. It's not like general, news to the public.
So okay, so I was sent out to Kiev, Ukraine, in 1992. At that time, my job was as a counterintelligence officer, is about setting up operational procedures for the buildings that they were erecting. Some of the other buildings, they were kind of just remodeling them and refashioning them, repurposing them. But at the time, one of the buildings that they were putting up was a bioweapons lab. This had multiple backing from the UN, several different companies, a lot of different major players around different countries. What I do know about the zombie virus is this. I had a pretty good generalized idea of what they were up to. Not the bona fide specifics, and it wasn't until much later. I still keep in contact with a lot of retired intelligence officers from different, countries from around the world. We have our own little secret channel that we confer on. We share information, and the Russian military intelligence has a back page. And he sent me a message one day saying, "Hey, go to our back page. We got some information." And what it was a video from Spetsnaz. So the Russian government was told.
Spetsnaz are Russian special forces, highly reputable. Also, Putin lately has been putting out a lot of messages that one of his number one things in the Ukraine is to remove the bioweapons labs. I
Yes.
just want to interject that.
No, that's fine. So they sent me this, Bob. We go to this page, and I pulled up the video, and I was watching it very closely. So their helicopter, they had one Spetsnaz officer in the helicopter that was basically viewing kind of like a remote viewing, but they were using X-ray technology, so they could kind of, you could see where everybody's at, the buildings, and they had two officers on the ground moving into a little village, Prayap. It's the name of this village, Prayap. Small, very small village. It's just right on the border, edges to the border. It's on the south side of the border between Ukraine and Russia. And U.S. government was conducting experiments. And so what they did was they injected the zombie virus into their food. And people that were tasked to bring the food into the village were told specifically not to touch this food, not even eat it. So they brought it in, they uncrated everything, and people started, putting it into their little store shops, whatever. Within 24 hours, all of the residents had turned into, in literal terms, zombies. They became the Walking Dead. And so the officers showed up, and the two Spetsnaz officers. And the first one was cornering this building, and he sees his people down the street. He was monitoring their behaviors and trying to see what they were doing, what was going on. But because they react to stimuli, they started running after him. And at the fast, the unprecedented rate of speed that they were moving, and the fact that he was dropping 7.62 rounds into these people, and they were not falling down whatsoever. They just, like, the bullets were going through them, but it was almost like they were impervious to the bullets. And so he called out on the radio to the second guy on the ground to run, to get out of there, hightail it, get to your extraction point. And he ended up running about a block down the street. He ended up going into a warehouse because he sees how fast they were moving. There was no way he'd get to his extraction point in time. So he figured I would just go in this building and hide myself. And what he didn't realize is that they could smell him. And so these people ran inside. Within seconds, they had pretty much quartered him. They, tore him apart from limb to limb to there was just nothing but the husk of the body. So what they did was they wanted to want us to see this, and they want us to be aware of what's going on. I took the video. I withdrew permission to release it to the public, to let them know about this. To kind of do a little expose.
So you had video of that going down?
Yeah. So this was in this is right around, I think, 1998, 1999.
Because I was going to ask you next about there was a video that was going around on YouTube and then later resurfaced again on TikTok. And it was a video of infrared footage of what appeared to be, for no lack of a better word, zombies that were chasing down people. And then when they got to them, they just ripped them apart.
Yeah.
And now a lot of people claimed, this is just an intro to some video games. But when you contacted the video game people contacted the video game companies and tracked it down, the video game company says this is not us or our footage at all. This is not made. So then where did that footage come from,
So I released the footage out on Facebook, and I have put some, descriptions into it explaining what people were seeing. Rockstar Video Game actually reached out to me.
That's it. Yeah.
And they asked me if that was, if I owned it, if I claimed or owned it or whatever.
So I'm wondering if that footage was your footage then that I saw.
Well, yeah, it's technically it's not my footage. It's the footage that was given to me.
But that footage is like some of the eeriest stuff I've ever seen in my life. Yeah.
And then Rockstar said, well, who do we get a hold of? And then, of course, I went back to my Russian counterpart and said, hey, Rockstar wants to buy the rights to this. And so they said, just you can have it for free, And so they ended up incorporating into their Modern Warfare game.
Right.
And so the younger generations today, whenever they see that footage, they associate that with the Rockstar video game. They don't
Right.
realize that
But
that's
I knew somebody who went down the rabbit trail, contacted them, and they said this wasn't, we did not create this footage. It was not our footage.
plausible deniability.
Yeah. Well, that's from the video game company. They're saying we as a video game did not create this,
Yeah,
because
they didn't.
everyone else was just saying, oh, it's just a video game. It's just a video game. It's just a video game. But no, that looked like some scary stuff. I still have got it like etched in my mind, and I've got it in my phone somewhere. It's just a ways back. Because
Well, yeah, I don't know if you ever heard of that the bath salt story that happened down
Yep,
in
yep. I was going to
Europe.
bring that up next. I got notes on what to ask you, and that's what I was going to say next. Is you had the incident that took place, I believe, in Miami, Florida, and then about a year after that, you had another one. They had two more incidences. Another one was around Louisiana, Alabama. Another one was in California. And I tried to track all those stories as best I could. And yeah, you had the guy they later claimed was bath salts, which we know is complete BS, right? There's no
Right.
way that bath salts could have caused anything like that.
No.
That guy ripped the guy's face apart and in public and in the broad daylight. The one I saw in California, the guy was going crazy, ripped off all of his clothes because he became like super heated, super hot. So they ripped their clothes off. This guy was attacking everyone in public in California. This woman was at a stoplight in her car and she had a sunroof. This dude jumps in the sunroof and attacks her.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so aggressive. He dove in the sunroof to attack her. I saw it on film. And yeah, and then also after that, they had another video that went out that looked like it was some kind of a military briefing for this thing with like a pinhole camera of somebody in the audience that was shooting this. You could see an emblem and them giving like a safety briefing and claiming that this was a report of the government doing controlled releases of this for testing purposes, right? And I don't know, the authenticity of that video or anything, but I tell you what, it was scary as all hell.
Yeah, there was there was a CIA agent who was in a debriefing room where the director of the CIA was upset and angry with their controlled experiments that went awry. NIH was called, well, these are the agencies that were involved in this, but the NIH, CDC, and WHO had all partnered in on this project. And they didn't want the public to know that this was a zombie virus.
Right.
Because if you got the public knowing the truth, there's going to be this mass hysteria.
Right.
What they were afraid of, and they would cause civilization collapse because of it. So they came out with a bath salt story. Well, this agent had a pinhole camera that was built into her purse, and that was recording this entire conversation, or the debriefing that they got, and they were upset and angry because they told us the CDC not to put anything out, and if anything, anybody reporter or anybody's investigating, plausible deniability. Okay,
Right.
so the CDC felt like they had to warn us somehow, and so the easiest way to do it is through informed consent. And they know they have to play by the informed consent rule. So they came out with a comic book of the zombie virus, what to do.
That was actually in the briefing. In the briefing, they talked about. I got my copy of World War Z by right sitting next to me on my bookshelf. Yeah, they talked about that book in the briefing because I looked it up afterwards. So you're saying that briefing was legitimate?
That briefing was legitimate.
Well, I tell you what, that was one scary as hell briefing. And I tell you what, having been in many briefings, it sure the heck sounded like a real briefing.
Yeah. Well, there's a few key markers that got. I was looking for it to verify whether or not it was actually a legit briefing. But of course, the first thing you want to find is there a legitimate CIA symbol within the room, and you see a lot of those CIA symbols on the internet, on Google, whatever. Those are not the legitimate form of symbols. If you go back and watch the video, you'll see the actual legitimate seal that you'll see on the CIA seal. But more importantly, the way they were discussing it as a debriefing, and basically they were trying to do was crowd control or damage control about the situation, because now the public knows that there is a legitimate zombie virus out there.
There was a story I heard about a military guy that said that he worked in a dump, and he said that his job in this dump was they would bring people in there, they would infect them on purpose with this zombie virus just to gauge reaction time, speeds, all of that, and then they would basically purge everything, kill everybody off, and then they would bring in another group, do the same thing over again. And said that his job in the dumbs, that's all he did, and it was this zombie virus. And I
Yeah,
don't know how real that is, but it started just like this other stuff, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up because it sounded very, very legitimate. Also, I have heard scientists say that I have heard scientists come forward and say that the notion of a zombie apocalypse is not as science fiction as we might think. That there are diseases and viruses very similar to like rabies disease and all that can basically kill parts of the brain but leave other parts of the brain alive, if you will, for some period of time until it just runs out of energy or fuel. That just craves like food and basic resources and contrary
regular
vitamins, et
functions.
cetera, et cetera. And so,
So what it is, it's not actually a virus.
okay,
Is what it actually is it's actually it's a fungus.
fungus.
It's a fungus spore.
Oh, that's interesting because you remember there was just a movie out recently that was saying at the end of the world, we don't have to worry about viruses, but funguses. Like that new show, um, uh, what is it? The Last of Us. The Last of Us. That just came out, big television series, I think on Netflix or something that was really big and very successful
I
with
haven't seen that one yet.
Pascal. That's what it was. It starts off saying there's a debate with these scientists in the beginning of the show, and they're like, this one scientist is being ridiculed, but he's saying we don't have to worry about like a virus apocalypse. We got to worry about a fungal apocalypse where this fungus takes you over and you become its host, and the result is you become like a zombie. And
So yeah, and
check that
the
out.
interesting thing is that they they were actually able to extract the fungus from the worms that they found up in Siberia when they were doing ice core samples. They were pulling out ice core samples. They found, I think, 3 worms from like the Cretaceous period or whatever. Um, they ended up successfully bringing 2 of those worms back to life. And what they noticed about it is that they had this really kind of a weird fungus attached to it, and they were able to extract that fungus, and they realized that these worms are not actually alive. They're controlled by this fungus. And so that's when they came up with the term of the zombie virus, or, zombie virus, whatever, but it's actually a fungus. And so I believe that's where they've been putting that into practice. And the way they're infecting these people is through uh, the
Right.
vaccination, the cover vaccination type shot.
Right.
So I do know that CDC in Atlanta, Georgia, is connected directly to an underground bunker. I do know that that's where they do a lot of their biological weapons research, just as well as in Kiev. Kiev has a bunker right above the city. There's always a city within a city, and that's where they do the majority or the mass amount of their biological weapons research in that particular area. So it didn't surprise me that they were testing them on on local
Yeah.
people. It is not, it's not hard. I mean, you do insert that fungus into food. The food takes to it very well. It doesn't spoil right away, and so when people start ingesting it, and that starts to go through that process within 24 hours, they're
Hmm.
no longer in control of their faculties. So,
That's terrifying.
yeah.
There was also some videos that have been going around on TikTok of U.S. military groups that say that they are working with police and little bitty outbreaks here and there. And I don't know if there's any legitimacy to those or if they're just a joke or whatever. But maybe I was wondering if you had any information about that.
So back in 2007, when Obama was president, U.S. federal government, along with its military, has a binding agreement with every city with a population of 100,000 or greater. Could have an exception of a few, like say around 20,000 or more. What they did was they had them come into an agreement that they would the city would agree to these terms, and in exchange they would give them armored personnel vehicles on loan. Okay, but these vehicles are on loan until an event takes place. So my city, we did have a population over 20,000. We're actually less than that right now, but the sheriff's department has one of these vehicles. And so I did, my research on this with my local, what the contract was they had with the federal government. So through a FOA request, I was able to see that and read through it. And understanding is that at any given time, that if the president declares martial law and they send the U.S. military into our city, the sheriff's department as well as the local police department have to comply because they signed that agreement, a contract with the government. So,
Yep.
so if your city does not have the police department does not have an armored personnel carrier vehicle, the chances are they did not sign that agreement.
Ours does. I just met the mayor recently, and I said, "Are you like the mayor in Jaws?" There was also a congressman I saw one time, and this was going viral at one point on YouTube years ago. But there was a congressman in Congress reading this. I don't know what it was exactly he was reading, but when he was reading it, he was like, "Okay, excuse me." He was like, "Okay, in the event of, oh my effing God, what, what, it, okay, in the event of, we will do what, and then we will take the survivors and what, what?" Like that was the whole briefing was like that, and then he even got to one point where he was just like, like he just became completely silent, trying to stumble over his words. You know what I'm talking about? You remember that? I was like, I don't know what the hell that is, but that sounds like either a giant outbreak or a zombie apocalypse, straight out. Because it was talking about containment plans, what we would do and the effect of what we would do for containment. And it was all like very severe stuff.
So here's the thing. So all of the domes, they're equipped with about 600 years worth of food. They're equipped with everything. I mean, anything and everything. And all of her food is pure food. It's all non-GMO food. They have laboratories, a whole level of laboratory where they just grow food. They also have a whole level where they raise animals as well.
Right.
Cattle, pigs, chicken, you name it. Okay. So the protocol is this: when they know there's an outbreak, whether by mutagen nature or whether it's the giant event or the catastrophic destruction of the 1/3 of the planet. We were talking about that before.
Right.
When you mentioned 1/3 of the world being destroyed, it's if you got to add up the numbers. So if you were to add up the United States as well as the other Western countries, they make up 1/3 of the world's population. So, so going back to this, that piece of paper he was reading was the contingency plan, but it wasn't just a contingency plan. It was what's going to happen.
Mm.
Okay, so he was basically
he was very disturbed when he read it.
He was, yeah. So I know he's on the armchair force committee.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff that they read in the skiff.
Well, you know what he was redacting out of that then, basically?
Yeah, and so what he was redacting was pretty much he was talking about the nebulism, the rise of nebulism.
That's what it
Uh,
sounded to me. My intuition said, okay, it's either a zombie attack on the pocket that they release, or it has to be a Nephilim attack that they're planning.
so if you go back to the days of just prior to Noah, we know about the Clash of the Titans. It's one thing they don't share to the general public is during that time, there was a like a Black Plague event that followed right behind with the clash of the Nebulisms or the clash of the Titans. There was a worldwide sickness that wiped out a large portion of the world of its population. So anytime you get, the Nebulism, say all the Nebulism decided they come up to the surface and start wreaking havoc. What follows with them is that you have to understand the Nebulisms that actually contain a fungal. Uh, uh, um, they have fungal spores on them, right? So anytime that you're within 10 feet of an nebulism giant, you actually have to wear a suit with their with a respirator unit with the oxygen, and you have to wear the suits. So as my job as an armed security officer, this is one thing we're trained on is that we can't approach them beyond the 10-foot barrier. There's actually lines on the ground around the containment units.
Right.
So you see like in the industrial shops or industrial factories, you'll see those little yellow markers. Just
Right.
if you go over that, that's your
Painted line, right?
yeah. So if we're going to go beyond that point, we have to have respirator suits if we're going to have to deal with these things. So there's a containment protocol, but they have fungus all over their bodies, and so they have to go through kind of a decontamination process constantly.
And what would that fungus do? Just make you sick?
No, that's the zombie virus fungus.
So the Nephilim themselves carry a fungus on themselves that is the zombie virus.
Yes.
And then what does that zombie virus do once you get infected with it? I know you said it was a 24-hour incubation period.
The first stage is confusion. They lose their sight. Um, they start hemorrhaging from the eyes, the nose, the ears. The brain starts to hemorrhage the fluid that protects the brain. Eventually, that fungus works its way into the bloodstream, starts hitting all the organs. It starts shutting down the organs. The only organ that it kind of keeps alive or kind of attaches itself as a host. That's at the stem of the brain between the spinal cord and the brain itself. And that's pretty much where it starts to reanimate the body. To sort of like as kind of like a parasite, pretty much controlling its host. So, but the organs itself, they're all non-functional. There's no circulatory system anymore at this point. It's just the brain itself is.
How can you put them down? Brain shots?
Yeah, headshots. The headshots are the most effective way.
You just got to destroy the central nervous system.
Yeah, severing the head from the body. Burning them or slows them down. It has to be really hot, really hot heat, pretty much to the point of melting. To a melting temperature, 2,000 degrees, I believe.
How do they spread the virus?
So they spread the virus through the saliva. Where the saliva is the most, what do you want to call it, the most
communicable
contagion, because that's where the
so will blood or other liquid body fluids contaminate, or just the saliva?
It's mostly within it's all mostly within the head itself. As far as the rest of the body, no. There's no circulatory, so they're not going to be bleeding anything out.
And what's they would have a timed lifespan at that point, because it's only so much fuel the body can run on until it stops to function.
Yeah,
So
it's about 2 years.
they can go 2 years.
2 years.
I was really hoping you'd say like 2 weeks, 2 months maybe.
I know. But the lifespan of them is about 2 years. It's the only way to put them down is um, causing severe damage to the brain or the stem of the brain anyway.
So if you were in this situation, you would at least want to gear yourself up in such a way where you couldn't be bit, like wearing heavy clothing, leather, stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, if you took a magazine, a thick magazine, wrapped it around your arms,
Right.
um, or you were
A
wearing,
good leather jacket. No one's buying through a thick leather jacket, you know.
yeah,
Like
uh,
even the biker jackets are, they're a lot of them are even armored. I mean, that's some heavy stuff.
right.
Or even the biker plastic, like you see him wearing in some of the like the even the Walking Dead show. It's thin, lightweight plastic, but it's great armor. You
You know
know.
what's funny? You mentioned the Walking Dead TV show. So, The Walking Dead, there was a script that was given to the two brothers that actually produced the comic series.
Which is very common by that the agency working in conjunction with Hollywood, right?
Yeah,
No shocker there.
that's just another informed consent to the public. That's
Yep.
why the TV series became such a hit because they brought in a lot of human emotions and situations. Um,
Always said in The Walking Dead, it's not the zombies that are the monsters; it's the people that are left alive are the monsters. You know.
yeah, I
I
mean,
also say there's no point in us surviving if our humanity doesn't survive along with it.
right? The unity has to be there, and people will have to get rid of the privileged, the idea of being privileged, whether it's by age or whether it's by status, whatever, all of that stuff is going to disappear. So everybody's going to be is going to have to work at one point based on what their skill sets are.
Yeah.
So, for example, if for a good example, I'm 50 years old, so I'm not about 20 years old. I don't have the physical capabilities like a 20-year-old does. I don't have the stamina like he does. So, if anything else, I might be in a leadership position, or I might be in charge of security, or I might be in charge of planning missions where they might be going out scavenging, or have a group go out, or just maybe a community leader or something like this. It's not about ruling and governing. It's more about organizations. About um, you know, some people are going to have more of a green thumb. That's all they know is how to grow shit. There's other people who have medical professionals who have degrees as a surgeon or a nurse or whatever, so they're going to be more in that perspective area. Others, like the young guys,
Right.
who don't have any real skill set, and they're going to be the workforce. But if
Well,
people,
not only that, but people don't realize. I always try and tell people when you analyze like The Walking Dead versus actual survival. Number one, they're carrying these bags of guns around, especially in the beginning, but you'd have to have 10 times those bags just for the ammunition. They would have depleted all their ammunition in the first episode.
yeah,
So, I mean, they're running through ammunition like it's nothing. Second of all, in that show, um, man, they're constantly fighting, but what they spend this much time on the show is actually looking for food. I promise you, that's your number one priority.
yeah,
And cans and all are only going to last so long, you know. And then the third thing on that show is gasoline isn't good after a year without additives and stuff like that to it. So how is it like 3-4 years down the road they're still ciphering vehicles and driving cars? It's not going to happen. It's not going to
right.
happen.
Well, not a lot say. I mean, there are other alternative fuels that you can create. It's much like gasoline, and it will
In
work like
parts of
gasoline.
Africa, they've even used alcohol types of engines for one
Yeah,
running.
if you can distill alcohol.
So there are ways to create on a small scale bio type fuels,
Yeah,
but But the situation they have on there where they're constantly caravanning, constantly going this way and that way, that would not happen. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's a few scenarios that when I first started watching it, I mean, my family said, "Hey, you got to watch this, Dad. We've already watched like 2 episodes of it. You got to catch up, Dad. You know, this has got that survival stuff you like." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I'll take a look gander at it." You know,
Right.
and I see the very first episode, which is the shock value. And
Mm,
that's very true. I mean,
yeah.
anybody that survives the initial impact, that shock value is going to be there. It's going to be like,
Right.
holy shit! Now, what do I do? And then trying to make sense of everything and rationalize what you're seeing around you, but you're not going to be able to. So, two things that are going to kick in. You're going to get into fight or flight mode constantly, and you're going to be trying to find a base of operations. You're going to be trying to find resources, and you're definitely going to be trying to find healthy human beings that you can kind of make friends with and kind of maybe invite them to your fortress or whatever. But there's always going to be some sort of a conflict of authority, because you're going to have these younger people who think they know everything are always going to want to be in a leadership position, but they have really no skill set to begin with.
That's back to that entitlement thing, right?
Yeah, that's where the entitlement comes in. And
And
then
not
you're
only that, but you also have this beta generation that thinks that I can be scrawny little 20-pound, 100-pound person that's going to be barking orders at people twice their size. That doesn't happen in real life. You
yeah,
know, it
yeah,
happens in TV and movies, but when this stuff comes down the pike, that you're not going to have that kind of crap anymore. I'm telling you, it's going to go back to older ways.
yeah. And one of the big things is, um, it's really going to be a fight over resources.
Yep, it's going to be a war over resources.
Yeah, because you,
People are gonna it's gonna go tribal, and people are gonna raid each other for. And that's the thing too, trying to travel, you like you said, better to find a safe place and fortify and stay there that has resources, if it has necessary resources, because otherwise all you're going to be dealing with is raiders outside. And you got the ones that act like, oh, help me, I need help, kind of thing. And yeah, it's a trap and your dinner, you know.
yeah,
That's going to be everywhere you go.
yeah,
People are going to be desperate. They're going to be starving, and when they can't find food in the can, they're going to try and can't find food in you. You know,
exactly. And you're going to see some people will revert back to cannibalism, because
yep.
when there's
Oh, a
nothing,
lot.
for one, how many people out there actually know that you can find food right in your own yard?
A lot of times, yeah. A lot
You
of time,
know,
right,
a
right.
lot of people don't know that.
Yep.
Just the basics of survival. Like, we've got so conditioned for so long. You eat everything out of a can or out of
Right,
a package. You throw in the microwave, and you got your instant meal, right? Or pieces already made and frozen. You just pick them out, stick them in the oven, right?
right, right.
How many people actually understand that? I mean, well, for a large part of the Midwest, from my experience, I've gone hunting. I worked with a lot of other hunters.
Yep. I hunt.
I've worked with the Department of Natural Resources and locating and acquiring certain top predator animals and
Right.
tracking them and stuff. But for the most part, when folks are, for one, they're not prepping. There's a lot
Right.
of people who are not
Yep.
prepping.
That's
Um,
why I started the other show, the Brave and Bushcraft, for people, just to go into some of the importance of these issues and why we need that, and why it's so important, and why people need to learn to do it. One of the person in the chat room asked me to ask you, with the giants containing this fungus that was this basically zombie fungus, are they affected by this, or are they immune to it?
they're immune to it. They're it doesn't have any effect on them at all, um, from an outward appearance. But there's this theory going around within the scientist community down there, is that they believe that the fungus is what is the driving force for more of the the different classifications of the Nephilisms. So the wild ones, the ones that are going around eating and killing people, they believe that they're more driven by the fungus, whereas the more domesticated ones, how they go through domestication processes, they basically sterilize them. They're killing off the fungus off of their bodies, and they're giving them other doses of medication to counter this in their system. They're trying to bring it back to more of a kind of a human,
rational state.
yeah, human state of mind, where they're more
Well,
docile and controllable.
I can tell you this: of all the stories I've heard of witnesses and everything that have dealt with, say specifically like Bigfoots and stuff, they range across the board. Some friendly, others just want to be left alone. Others are very curious about us, and some will just kill you because you're in their territory. Period. They tend to be extremely territorial, and if they perceive that you're encroaching on their territory, they will react with violence to that. Others will eat you just because they're hungry, or just aggressive. So I've heard of stories where they've saved people's lives. Like there's the rescue jumpers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They've gotten caught in fires and said that a hairy person carried them out to safety. There's lots of stories of even dog men attacking people and Bigfoot's intervening. There's many, but then there's also many stories of you being in the wrong place, the wrong time, and that Bigfoot will eat you up without thinking twice. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it to stop them. You don't know, rhyme or reason as to what or when, but they can be nice, they can be friendly, they can just want to be left alone, or they can eat you.
Yeah, they're, well, I can tell you that the more the wild they are, the more unpredictable they are. But in that scientific community, in the underground dumps, they have protocols. They have expectations, and there's been like, again, this goes back to about the 1920 when they first started really studying them, capturing them and studying them. So they're very aware of how, and certain ones do certain things, have certain talents, they have weaknesses, and so as I understand it, there's 26 classifications for each of these Nephilisms. So the ranges it depends on, I guess, its genetic makeup. But I do know that every single one of them have not a virus, but the spores.
Every one of them has the spores to that zombie virus.
Yeah, they all have that spore on the surface of the skin because the body produces this particular spore.
Even like the Bigfoots that are in the wild here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll stay away from them all.
Yeah. So it's I'm not really sure if you were to come into physical contact with one, say you were stroking his hair or something. I'm not really sure, if you're stroking his hair and then turned around and like wiped your eye and licked your finger or something, I'm not really sure if that's.
Well, that brings you back to the infected zombie. So we talked about its saliva, but can it produce spores as well if it's fungal?
I'm not really sure. I don't know that. All I know is that was the fungus that was used along with its DNA to create this zombie virus. So I'm not wondering if the zombie virus in itself is actually contained within the saliva of each of these beings.
Right.
And the only way they can actually, I think that's the reason why they eat people, is because they don't want them to turn into zombies. They eat them maybe just as a food source.
The actual word cannibal goes back to the giants. It was the worshippers of Baal in the land of Canaan. Baal.
Yeah.
That's where many of the giants came from.
Yep.
And people don't even realize this too. Like if you look in the Bible, when it says that Moses and the people had to wander the desert for 40 years, you ask any Christian, why did they have to wander the desert for 40 years? Oh, because they disobeyed God. Okay. But what specifically did they do to upset God that caused that punishment? And it was, they went to the promised land. They went to the Jordan River. They sent in Caleb and Joshua, and they came back and said, there's giants in there. We're the size of grasshoppers in their hands.
Yeah.
And they said that they were the sons of Anak, which sounds very familiar to the Anunnaki, which fits right into everything you've been saying.
Yeah.
You know? So, but it was because of the giants that the people lost faith in God, and God punished them for their lack of faith. He's like, "You've seen everything I've done for you." Before Ramses II with the, the Red Sea and everything I've done, and you're still at this point not going to have faith and trust in me.
Well, what they did, what the pivotal point of that was, is that they reverted back to not only having a lack of faith in God, but they said, okay, well, maybe we should worship the giants and we should worship Baal. So that's where they came up with their, making the golden calf.
Right, right.
They built the golden calf as a way to maybe to appease the giants once they get over there.
Right.
And that's why Moses came down and said, those who are with the Lord come to this side, and those who came over were still faithful to the Lord. But there was a bunch of them that still chose to reject the Lord, and instead they were going to go to worship giants by using that statue, because that statue of that the statue of Moloch, I think it is. And so the giants would recognize that and say, okay, we're here to worship this. So,
well, Shawn, I'm gonna cut it short so that or cut it down. It's been 2.5 hours. But I tell you what, I mean, this is a phenomenal amount of information and some new information. I think it's fantastic. So, if you wouldn't mind, we'll definitely have to come do another show and pick up this stuff again, because it's too much to completely cover in one episode. So I'd love for you to come back and do another one. Plus, next we'll do one on the kicking off the bushcraft, Raven Bushcraft channel, just to point out why survival is important and why we need to start doing it for those who haven't, and just simple ways of doing that with gear and stuff. I'm going to be talking about things like what's the difference between carbon steel and stainless steel as far as a knife or tool. What's the difference between a down bag versus a synthetic bag, and what are pros and cons and that kind of stuff. So, but also for anyone interested, you can contact me on this show. I have an email at the Harbinger Report at yahoo.com. That's the Harbinger Report at yahoo.com. And if anyone's interested in any of the bushcraft stuff, I've got an email for Raven Bushcraft at yahoo.com. And if anyone wants to contact Shawn, if you want anyone to contact you,
it's Shawn Starry at gmail.com.
At gmail.com. Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We'll pick it up next time, and thanks for tuning in. Have a good night and Happy New Year to all of you. And hope you sleep better than I am tonight after all this stuff.
Well, thank you.